They underestimated you because they were measuring with the wrong scale. They thought intelligence was about trivia, about knowing the right facts at the right time. But your intelligence was something else entirely. It was a mix of patience, perception, and the ability to read through the masks people wear. You saw through the gaps in their stories, the small cracks they thought no one would notice. You remembered details they dismissed. You connected threads they thought were hidden. And when you finally moved, when you finally revealed what you knew, it left them speechless. Their performance collapsed because you had already seen the ending before they even finished their act. That kind of intelligence doesn't just impress. It terrifies, because it shows them they were never really in control. You prove that intelligence is not always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with big words or long speeches. True intelligence is subtle. It's the quiet way you notice the patterns in people's behavior. It's the way you wait, watching, letting others reveal more than they should while you say less than you know. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought you were detached. But your silence was simply a ledger, collecting every move they made. And when the moment came, you didn't need to defend yourself with arguments. You defended yourself with evidence. That's why their mouths closed. That's why their eyes widened. You showed them that intelligence is not about performing. It's about positioning. The reason you stand in a league of your own is because you do not compete in the same games they do. They chase attention. You chase clarity. They argue to win applause. You observe to win control. They waste energy trying to prove they're smart. You conserve energy and let your results prove it for you. This separation is what makes people nervous around you. They can't figure out how you operate because you don't react the way they expect. And when someone cannot predict you, they cannot control you. That is the foundation of real power. Intelligence isn't just knowledge. It's unpredictability built on clarity. Your intelligence shook them because it wasn't shallow. You didn't just memorize, you internalized. You didn't just repeat, you reinvented. That is what scared them. They realized you could take the same information everyone else had access to and spin it into something sharper, something deadlier. You weren't impressed by the surface. You dug into the roots. And when you spoke, it wasn't for decoration. It was with weight, with purpose, with precision. That precision made them feel like amateurs, fumbling with noise while you carved the air with sentences that cut. It wasn't arrogance. It was mastery. And mastery will always silence the crowd. The psychology here is brutal. Most people want to feel smarter than others, even when they're not. They love the illusion of superiority. They cling to small victories of wit or cleverness to feed their ego. But when faced with someone whose mind slices through pretense, they collapse. They feel smaller. They feel exposed. That is why people both admire and resent intelligence like yours. It reminds them of their limitations. It makes them see how much of their confidence was built on fragile lies. You didn't humiliate them on purpose. You simply showed up as yourself. But your very existence revealed the difference between pretending to know and truly understanding. You carry intelligence like armor, but also like a weapon. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to fight for the spotlight to command attention. The way you think, the way you plan, the way you connect dots no one else noticed. These are the things that make people turn to look twice. And in that double take, they feel it. They feel the gap between where they are and where you stand. That's why they can't dismiss you, even if they try. Intelligence is not just about being clever. It's about being undeniable. And you have reached the point where denial no longer works against you. You should never underestimate what this means for your future. Intelligence doesn't just separate you. It attracts opportunities others can't even see. While they scramble for scraps, you notice entire doors they didn't know existed. You move differently, and because of that, different paths open for you. That is why you are in a league of your own. It's not just about being smarter. It's about being sharper, more strategic, more dangerous in the way you refuse to settle for appearances. You've trained yourself to see deeper, and in a world addicted to surfaces, that makes you rare. Rare enough to be feared. Rare enough to be respected. Remember, people will try to shrink you to make themselves feel safe. They will call you arrogant. They will accuse you of overthinking. They will attempt to dismiss your clarity because it makes them uncomfortable. But that discomfort is proof. Proof that your intelligence has weight. Proof that your presence shakes the balance they depend on. Don't let their words fool you. Their fear is not about you being wrong. It's about you being right in a way they cannot touch. And once you realize that, you will stop lowering yourself for people who never stood on your level to begin with. You don't need to announce that you're in a league of your own. Life announces it for you. Every time you solve problems they couldn't, every time you stay calm in chaos, every time you cut through confusion with clarity, the gap becomes undeniable. And the more undeniable it becomes, the more isolated you'll feel. That isolation is not punishment. It is proof. Proof that you've outgrown the games, the illusions, the fragile competitions. You are no longer one of many. You are one apart. That separation may feel lonely, but it is also your crown. Because only those who can stand alone ever truly rule. They once played their games with ease. They pulled strings, manipulated emotions, and set traps designed to keep you small. You were expected to react the same way you always did. Explaining, defending, justifying, lowering yourself to maintain their comfort. But something shifted. You stopped stepping into their loops. You stopped answering every accusation. You stopped explaining yourself to people who never listened. And the moment you outgrew their tactics, they felt the loss of control cut into their skin. That's when the word arrogant appeared. Not because you had changed into something ugly, but because your refusal to bend made them confront their own weakness. They label you arrogant to cover the truth that you've become untouchable. The psychology behind their insult is simple. People fear what they can't control. For years, their tactics worked. They knew which buttons to push, which words would throw you off balance, which stories would make you doubt yourself. You were predictable then, and predictable is easy prey. But now, you've learned to breathe through manipulation. You've learned to pause instead of react. You've learned that silence punishes louder than any argument. And with each tactic that falls flat, their panic grows. That panic needs a disguise, so they smear you with words like arrogant, cold, selfish. Those labels don't describe you. They describe their fear. They describe their loss of power. The insult is not about you. It is a mirror of them. You must recognize how much growth it takes to outgrow their tactics. They designed those tricks carefully, crafted through your weaknesses, rehearsed in your past. Yet your patience and awareness outpaced them. You evolved, and they remained stuck. That evolution made you dangerous because now their entire arsenal is useless against you. People who build their lives on manipulation do not know how to fight without it. When every scheme is met with indifference, they are exposed as empty, and emptiness terrifies them. But instead of admitting their weakness, they cloak it with accusations. They will call your strength arrogance because they cannot call it submission. And to them, anything that is not submission is terrifying. Their fear grows in silence. They will never tell you how unnerving it is to watch their tactics fail. They will never admit that your calm cuts deeper than anger. They will never confess how your indifference makes them feel invisible. Instead, they create a story for others to believe. They say you've changed. They say success has made you arrogant. They say your distance proves you think you're above them. What they refuse to say is the truth. You simply stop giving them access to your mind. And the less access they have, the more irrelevant they feel. Their insult is their way of clinging to relevance, even if it's through slander. You should never shrink to make their comfort return. Once you outgrow the trap, never step back into it. Arrogance is their word, not your reality. Confidence built on scars, on lessons, on endurance, is not arrogance. It is survival. It is clarity. They call you arrogant only because humility to them meant servitude. They don't miss your kindness. They miss your obedience. And you must see through this illusion. They don't want you smaller for your sake. They want you smaller for theirs. Refuse. Stand tall. Let their accusations echo while you keep moving forward. The insult loses power the moment you refuse to defend against it. You should take their insult as confirmation. If they still had control, they would not call you arrogant. They would still call you easy, pliable, predictable. But they don't. They resort to words meant to sting because every other weapon failed. And when you hear them call you arrogant, what they really mean is, you are no longer theirs to manage. Their anger is proof of your progress. Their fear is proof of your growth. Their accusations are proof that you have risen to a level where their tactics cannot reach you. And that proof should fuel you to keep walking in your clarity, no matter how loud their noise grows. The fear they feel isn't about you alone. It's about what you represent. You became the reminder that their control has limits. If you broke free, others can too. And that possibility terrifies manipulators, because control thrives in silence, in illusion, in belief that no one can escape. You became the escape. You became the proof. So they try to brand you with arrogance in hopes of warning others not to follow you. But the irony is that the more they speak, the more curious others become. The more they accuse, the more obvious their fear looks. And eventually, even their allies begin to wonder what you did to make them so rattled. Their words betray them, not you. Remember, intelligence and strength will always be mislabeled by those who lack it. Your boundaries will be called arrogance. Your clarity will be called pride. Your success will be called luck. Your refusal to bend will be called cruelty. And each label they throw is simply another mask over their fear. You must stop translating their words as truth. Translate them as signals. Every insult is a signal of what they fear about you. They fear your confidence. They fear your growth. They fear your independence. And the louder they call you arrogant, the more they confess how much you've surpassed them. The most dangerous thing you can do to them is nothing. You don't argue the insult. You don't defend against the accusation. You let it hang in the air. And in that silence, the insult collapses on itself. Because accusations without evidence become comedy over time. The crowd starts to see through them. People begin to notice the pattern. Every person who outgrows them is suddenly arrogant. Every soul who refuses their games is suddenly selfish. Every survivor of their control is suddenly too proud. And once people see the pattern, the manipulators lose their audience. Their words lose weight. Their tactics lose teeth. Exposure finishes them off. They never wanted you to shine. They wanted you to conform, to nod when they nodded, to echo their shallow thoughts back at them, so they could feel secure in their mediocrity. But you didn't. You spoke with clarity. You thought faster. You saw what they missed. And in a toxic group, that isn't treated as a gift. It's treated as rebellion. Because your brilliance exposes their lack. Your sharpness highlights their dullness. Your insight reminds them that they are not as clever as they pretend to be. And instead of admiring it, they resent it. They cannot applaud what makes them feel small. So they brand it as arrogance, troublemaking, or betrayal. They turn your brilliance into rebellion because that narrative protects their fragile egos. They always functioned on unspoken rules. Don't think too deeply. Don't question too loudly. Don't rise too quickly. Those rules keep the hierarchy safe, keep the leaders unchallenged, keep the followers comfortable. But your mind refused those rules. You didn't set out to rebel. You set out to think. You asked questions. You noticed contradictions. You refused to pretend ignorance was wisdom. And to them, that act alone was dangerous. In toxic groups, compliance is worshipped. Brilliance is punished. Because brilliance shines light into corners they work hard to keep dark. And the more you showed your clarity, the more threatened they became. Your thoughts didn't just challenge ideas. They challenged their entire structure. You must see how their fear translates into behavior. They start whispering. They begin painting you as a problem before you even realize what's happening. They accuse you of being difficult, of not being a team player, of thinking you're better than everyone else. These are not reflections of who you are. They are reflections of their terror. Because toxic groups are addicted to sameness. Brilliance disrupts sameness. It reminds them that progress is possible, and progress demands effort they do not want to give. So they smear you instead. They attack your character because they cannot attack your clarity. It is rebellion in their eyes, not because you sought war, but because you refused to kneel. The psychology here is revealing. People in toxic groups need control more than truth. They survive by silencing the sharper minds in the room. If one person sees too much, asks too much, or knows too much, the illusion begins to crumble. That's why your brilliance feels like rebellion to them. It is not about you being against them. It is about them being terrified of exposure. Your ideas threaten their comfort zone. Your awareness threatens their image. Your presence threatens their false order. They can't admit that fear, so they disguise it as righteous anger. They will say you're reckless. They will say you're rebellious. But what they mean is, you're awake, and they are not. They try to box you in because brilliance demands freedom. They assign labels to cage you. Arrogant, outsider, overthinker. They use those words to isolate you from others, to warn people not to align with you. But brilliance has a strange effect. It attracts even when smeared. Others see the spark. Others hear the sharpness in your voice, and secretly, they respect it. They may not say it aloud, but they notice. Toxic groups know this too. That's why they move so aggressively to brand you early. They want to kill admiration before it grows. They fear you gathering allies. They fear your brilliance turning into leadership. So they smear, they attack, they expel. All in the name of order. You didn't set out to rebel, but rebellion chose you the moment you refused to dim your light. And that is the choice you now face. Do you shrink to make them comfortable? Or do you stand tall and let their discomfort expose itself? Understand this. If you shrink, you'll suffocate. If you stand tall, they will call you a rebel. But rebellion is not failure. Rebellion is proof. Proof that you broke out of the cage. Proof that you refused the illusion. Proof that their tactics no longer define you. In toxic groups, brilliance is rebellion because they have no other word for freedom. Think of how many before you stayed silent. How many saw the same cracks you saw, but chose to swallow their thoughts for safety? They chose to remain part of the group, even if it meant erasing themselves. That is the price of belonging in toxic spaces. They don't want the real you. They want the edited version that bends easily. But you refused editing. You brought the full version of yourself. That is rebellion to them. And while they may cast you out, you must understand the gift in that exile. Because once you are out, you are free. And freedom, unlike belonging, doesn't rot your soul. They will never admit this to you, but deep down, they admired you before they feared you. Brilliance always stirs both admiration and envy. They wanted your insight when it served them. They wanted your clarity when it benefited their plans. But the moment your brilliance illuminated their own incompetence, admiration turned to hostility. That switch is inevitable. In toxic groups, people want you sharp enough to serve, but never sharp enough to surpass. The moment you surpass, you become rebellion in their story, and so they write you out of their narrative. But what they don't see is that your story grows stronger once they're no longer holding the pen. You are proof that brilliance cannot be silenced forever. They can smear, they can exile, they can brand you as a rebel. But in time, their weakness shows. The group stagnates without thinkers. The same problems repeat, the same lies collapse, the same patterns devour them. Meanwhile, you thrive outside their walls. Your brilliance, once a rebellion in their eyes, becomes leadership in the eyes of others. That is the long game. They call you a rebel today to scare you. Tomorrow, they will call you a visionary because they'll have no choice. That is the way it always ends. They studied you the way gamblers study dice. They wanted patterns. They wanted a rhythm they could bet against. They needed to know what you would do before you even thought of doing it. But you didn't give them that luxury. You shifted when they expected you to stay still. You stayed quiet when they expected an outburst. You refused the bait they had dangled for years. And the moment they realized they could no longer read you, their fear disguised itself as slander. They didn't call you unpredictable with respect. They called you dangerous, arrogant, unstable. Not because it was true, but because they had to paint you in colors that would make others doubt you. They discredit what they cannot control. They always have. And the more unreadable you become, the more desperate their smears grow. They cannot tolerate uncertainty. For people like them, prediction is their currency. They thrive on knowing what someone will do under pressure, how they will react to a lie, how they will stumble when cornered. But you burned their playbook. You no longer reacted to their traps. You stopped explaining yourself, stopped defending yourself, stopped bending your behavior to soothe their insecurities. That terrified them more than open defiance. Because open defiance can still be predicted. Silence cannot. Strategic calm cannot. That's when they started whispering. They told others you were manipulative, you were scheming, you were someone not to be trusted. Those lies were not about you. They were about their fear of the unknown. The unpredictable mind is a threat to people addicted to control. You've seen how it plays out. The moment you stop feeding their expectations, They try to convince others that you are the problem. It's a projection. They tell others you are dangerous because they feel their own danger. They tell others you are unstable because their plans are falling apart. They tell others you cannot be trusted because trust is the very thing they lost. Their attempts to discredit you are admissions of defeat. They want the world to fear you the way they do. Because if the world still believes their story, then maybe they can recover some of the control they lost over you. But exposure is a ruthless equalizer. Their accusations collapse under their own weight once people notice the pattern. The psychology here is cruel but clear. Humans crave predictability. It makes them feel safe. It gives them a false sense of power. When someone like you breaks that cycle, when your mind refuses to walk the lines they draw, they panic. They feel like they are staring into a storm with no map. They can't plan against you because they don't know which direction you'll strike from. And that uncertainty gnaws at them until it becomes unbearable. To soothe their anxiety, they craft stories. They smear your name. They turn unpredictability into a flaw in public, even though in private, it is the very reason they fear you. Their need to discredit you is their confession. They have no other weapon left. You don't need to defend yourself against their smears. Every attempt to discredit you is proof you've outgrown their influence. If you were still predictable, if you were still easy to control, they wouldn't waste their breath. They would simply keep pulling the same strings. But the fact that they now campaign against you shows how powerless they feel. Take it as a compliment twisted into insult. The unpredictable mind is feared because it cannot be owned. And in a world obsessed with ownership, that makes you dangerous. Dangerous not because of what you do, but because of what they cannot do to you anymore. Watch closely how their narrative spreads. At first, some will believe them. People always side with the loudest voice in the beginning. They'll nod, they'll whisper, they'll question you. But time has a way of revealing patterns. As you stay calm, as you move forward, as you remain consistent in your silence and your results, their story grows weaker. Others begin to notice the desperation in their voice. They see how much energy is spent trying to convince everyone that you are untrustworthy. And suspicion flips. People begin to wonder why they're so obsessed with discrediting you in the first place. And that's when the smear campaign turns into self-destruction. You have to remember this truth. Predictable minds are replaceable. They're safe. They're easy. No one talks about them. No one fears them. They're pawns on the board. The unpredictable mind, however, bends the board itself. It forces everyone to play differently. It creates tension, suspicion, and respect. That is why they target you. Not because you are weak, but because you are powerful in ways they cannot manage. Their fear of you is proof of your evolution. You left the category of pawn and became something they cannot name. And what people cannot name, they try to discredit. It's easier than admitting they've been outclassed. Take note of how they shift when their discrediting fails. At first, they're loud, throwing accusations like confetti. But when people stop buying into it, when you remain untouched, they retreat. They grow quiet, bitter, resentful. And in that quiet, you see the truth. They never hated you. They hated that you could no longer be played. They hated that the strings no longer reached your shoulders. They hated that you carried a mind they couldn't predict, a mind they couldn't rewrite, a mind they couldn't bend into obedience. That hate will follow them, but it no longer follows you. You've already moved past their reach. The danger of your unpredictability is also your shield. They will never know your next move, and that means they cannot prepare for it. They cannot sabotage what they cannot see. That's why you must guard your unpredictability with discipline. Don't let them lure you into explaining yourself. Don't let them trick you into showing your cards. Keep your silence sharp and your actions sharper. Let them choke on uncertainty, because the more they grasp at shadows, the more foolish they look. The unpredictable mind does not just survive lies. It uses lies as proof of its power. Their smears become your crown, their fear your confirmation. Every manipulator believes they are original. They walk into rooms with rehearsed words, fake smiles, and carefully constructed traps, convinced that no one will notice the strings they're pulling. But manipulation is never as invisible as they think. Every liar leaves fingerprints. Every deceiver repeats habits. They all recycle the same tricks because human weakness is predictable. They flatter when they need access. They guilt trip when they feel you slipping away. They grow louder when their silence fails. These are not accidents. They are patterns. And intelligence is nothing more than the art of recognizing those repetitions before they close in. Once you see the pattern, their spell breaks. You stop reacting the way they expect. You stop dancing to their rhythm. That is when the game shifts and suddenly the manipulator feels exposed, naked in the spotlight of your awareness. Your intelligence grew sharper each time you noticed the cycle repeating. The first time you might have been caught. The second time you may have hesitated, unsure if it was coincidence. But by the third and fourth time, the truth was undeniable. Their tactics weren't unique. They were predictable moves disguised as cunning. That realization is the weapon that turns the tables.